You have killed a god. Not a small one, not a forgotten one. You have pulled the head off Olympus itself. You have put your hands around the throat of the divine order that built the world you live in, and you have crushed it until there was nothing left. And now you are standing in the ruins. And the ruins are you. This is the part nobody talks about when they describe Kratos. They talk about the rage. They talk about the power. They talk about the god of war who made the gods themselves afraid. What they do not talk about is what it cost, what it took, what was hollowed out to create the thing that could do all of that. Because Kratos was not born a monster, he was built into one. Carefully, systematically, by a world that needed someone willing to go further than anyone else, and then blamed him for going there. And the most devastating thing about his entire story is this: he knew. Every step of the way, on some level, he knew what was happening to him, and he could not stop. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the rage, before the rage. Kratos was a Spartan general, a real one. Not a myth, not a legend. A man. He led real soldiers. He had a real family. A wife named Lysandra, a daughter named Calliope. He had something to protect and something to come home to. And he was brilliant at war, terrifyingly effective. The kind of commander that enemies learn to fear not because of what he can do alone, but because of what he can make an entire army do. He was winning. He was building something. A name. A legacy. A future. And then he wasn't enough. His army was surrounded by the forces of Ares, the actual god of war, and they were going to be destroyed. Completely. Utterly. And in that moment, facing total annihilation, Kratos did what desperate people do when desperation reaches its absolute edge. He prayed. He offered himself to Ares, his service, his life, his soul, in exchange for survival, in exchange for power. And Ares said yes. Here is what you need to understand about that prayer. Kratos was not weak. He was not faithless. He was a man watching his soldiers die and making the only calculation he could see. He traded himself for them. That is not cowardice. That is a specific kind of sacrifice. But the thing about Ares is that he did not want a servant. He wanted a weapon. And weapons do not get to keep the things that make them hesitate. Weapons do not get to have wives who make them pause. Weapons do not get to have daughters who make them human. So Ares took them. He orchestrated it so that Kratos, in the fog of battle, in the blind fury he had spent months cultivating in his new soldier, would walk into a temple and kill everyone inside. His hands, his blade, his family. When the fog lifted and Kratos understood what he had done, the village oracle cursed him. The ashes of his wife and daughter were bonded to his skin permanently. He would never be clean of them. The white ash that covers his body for the rest of his life is not a warrior's marking. It is a monument. It is the physical reminder of the worst thing he ever did, carried in the only place he can never escape from. His own body became his prison. Now here's where the story becomes a trap instead of a tragedy. Because Kratos survived the guilt, he became the servant of the Olympian gods. He completed their missions. He fought their monsters. He did whatever they needed. Brutal, relentless, effective, all in exchange for one promise: that they would take away the nightmares, that they would remove the memory of what he had done. And for a while they let him believe they could. 10 years. 10 years of service. 10 years of doing things that corroded whatever was left of the person he had been before Ares got involved. He was not building a new life. He was earning an absolution that the gods were never actually planning to deliver. Because that is the thing about Olympus. The gods did not want Kratos free. They wanted Kratos useful. A freed servant is a person. A person has autonomy. A person might want things that do not serve the gods' agenda. They needed him to stay in the cycle. Keep the guilt alive just enough to be motivating. Keep the promise of relief just out of reach. Keep him running towards something that was always going to be one more mission away. Sound familiar? This is what every system that uses people does. Keep them just grateful enough to stay. Keep the cost of leaving higher than the cost of continuing. Give them enough to function, not enough to be free. Kratos was not a god's champion. He was a labor dispute that the gods had rigged from the beginning. And then there is the rage. Not as a personality trait. Not as a character flaw. as a survival mechanism. Here is the thing about unprocessed grief. In an environment that does not allow grief, it does not disappear. It calcifies. It turns into something harder and denser and far more dangerous than the original emotion. It stops being sadness and becomes fuel. It stops being loss and becomes engine. Kratos' rage is not who he is. It is what happened to grief when it had nowhere to go for 20 years. Think about what that means in practice. Every moment of genuine feeling, guilt, love, loss, longing, became anger. Because anger was the only emotion his world had a use for. Because vulnerability in that environment was an opening. Because tenderness had already cost him everything once, and his entire being had reorganized around making sure it never got close enough to cost him again. He became someone who could not be soft. Not because softness was wrong, because softness in the world he had been placed in was something that got weaponized against you. That is not a character flaw. That is an adaptive response to a world that was actively hostile to anything human in him. And then, slowly, bloodily, over the course of years and multiple impossible battles, he kills every god who wronged him. He brings down Olympus. He tears through the divine order that built him and broke him and used him and lied to him. He wins. But here is what winning looks like. The world is collapsing. The destruction of the gods has consequences that Kratos did not calculate, or perhaps did not care about in the red middle of his revenge. Plagues, floods, earthquakes. The foundations of the world cracking because the system holding it together, corrupt as it was still holding it together. The Greek world ends. Millions of people who had nothing to do with what was done to Kratos pay the price for what he did to Olympus. And Kratos is left standing in the ash. Again, different ash this time. The ash of everything, of the world. He survives. Of course he survives. Kratos always survives. That is the specific cruelty of his existence, that he cannot die, that death consistently refuses to take him, that the release that any other broken person might have access to is structurally unavailable to him. He wanders. He finds his way to the Norse lands. He tries, genuinely, completely, quietly, to become someone else. Someone smaller. Someone who does not destroy things on a divine scale. He marries again. He has a son, Atreus. He builds a life out of restraint and silence, and the specific effort of keeping everything he is locked inside a body that has learned to not react, and it works. For a while. And then it doesn't. Because the Norse gods find him. Because the cycle begins again. Because the world that Kratos moves through has a specific talent for locating whatever he is trying to protect and making it the target. He tells his son to be better than him. He tells his son that rage is a chain, not a weapon. He tries to pass forward the lesson he learned too late, paid too much for, and still carries in the ash on his skin. He is a father trying to prevent his son from becoming what he had to become. And the most heartbreaking possibility, the one that lives in the subtext of every quiet scene between them, is that he might succeed, that Atreus might actually be different, that something good might actually come forward through everything Kratos went through. But Kratos will not get to be the recipient of that good thing. He will stand outside it. He will make it possible, and then he will stand at the edge of it and watch it exist for someone else. Because that is the specific sentence of Kratos' life. He creates things he cannot have. He protects people he cannot fully reach. He becomes capable of love again only after love has already been used to define what can be taken from him. You want to know what the god of war is? He is a man who made one desperate prayer in a moment of total vulnerability. And the universe answered that prayer by spending the next several decades systematically destroying everything he was, everything he loved, and everything he built, and then handing him just enough survival to feel every second of it. He did not choose to be the god of war. He chose to save his men. Everything else was done to him. He carries his family in his skin, literally, every day, every battle. Every quiet moment with his son when Atreus asks him a question and Kratos pauses before answering because somewhere inside the pause, he is still standing in that temple, still holding what he held. Still covered in ash that no amount of time or victory or war will ever wash away. You think you know Kratos. You know the rage. You know the power. You know the god of war. You do not know the Spartan general who just wanted to bring his soldiers home. He has not been seen since the day Ares answered a prayer.